work at Eli Lilly and Company. We have conveniently not listed our names in the order in which we are sitting, so I will try to rectify that as we do introductions. I do feel like I need to start with a disclaimer. 2 hours ago, I was professionally ready to have this deep conversation about patient-centered drug development and the Learning Health Network, Learning Health System. And then I sat through the previous session on, let's see, family caregiving and then death and bereavement. And as I think for many of you who sat through that and stayed for 20 minutes into the overspill of that excellent conversation, I was deeply touched by that. So if I get a little teary up here, it's not because I'm so moved by patient co-creation and drug development. It's because something else is going on with me cognitively and emotionally right now. So I'll do my best to keep it together because this also is a very important topic, but for very different reasons. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Sitting next to me is Laura Crawford. Well, I guess I'm standing right now, but anyway, sitting here is my dear friend, actually, Laura Crawford. She is a medical informaticist, which I think is so nerdy and cool. She worked in the first half of her career in teaching hospitals, and she was focused at that point on improving information at the point of care in the hospital setting. The second half of her career, she's been focused on research, and in that realm, she's been and still passionate about improving the connection, but now between the healthcare delivery system and the research sector. So we've had many lunches and coffees where she talks about improving information flow from bench to bedside. So Laura is really passionate about creating a truly connected health ecosystem where data, information, and evidence flow efficiently. And I think you'll really enjoy getting to know her today and getting to learn more about that passion. She speaks about it quite eloquently. And then Marianne Sterling, who many of you may already know. She is a very powerful patient advocate. Let me switch my notes here so that I can be sure to cover the important parts. So Marianne is a patient healthcare advocate and activist. She has deep experience as a family caregiver, so I know she was affected by the previous conversation as well. In fact, all three of us have some life experiences that make this a really personal passion for all of us. But Marianne's focus is more on policy side of things, so she really wants to change the national dialogue on caregiving and bring attention to the caregiving crisis that is facing our nation. She and her husband have 3 out of 4 parents who have had Alzheimer's disease. So she has been a caregiver for all of her adult life. And she and her husband together are dedicated to transforming the Alzheimer's journey through better policy, better care, and better research. All right. So just a little bit about how we're going to cover today. We're going to start with a couple of definitions because these topics, these titles, I don't think really roll off the tongue: patient-centered drug development and the learning health system. And then we're going to have some great examples of this happening in real life. And then we'll close with some ways that you can get involved if you're not already. So I'm going to sit. So can you go to the next slide? Yeah, I think we can skip this one, actually. I've kind of already talked through this. All right, so let's start with the definition. So Laura, maybe you could speak to this one. What is patient-centered drug development, and why does it matter to patients and caregivers?
So patient-centered drug development is including and proactively including the point of view and the needs and the experiences and the values of patients and caregivers in every stage of drug development. Right now we do that here and there. We are experimenting with that and trying to do a better job of it, but real patient-centered drug development would be, we would feel like something was wrong if we didn't have very strong patient and caregiver input in every stage of development. Do you want to comment on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. Laura's right. This is like a monumental shift in how we develop drugs in this country. Actually incorporating the patient and the family caregiver at each stage of development, huge shift. We actually become partners in this process when you think about it, in the drug development process. Our views, our experiences, our preferences, suddenly become critical pieces of the puzzle. And so you're probably thinking, why does this matter? Because we have important information to share with researchers. We experience a disease or a condition 24 hours a day, right? Either directly or from an observational perspective, in the case of family caregivers. In my case, I've actually witnessed 3 different types of dementia over a period of 30 plus years. So I've got a head full of information to share with researchers, and until now, nobody has remotely expressed an interest in it. So this is why this topic is so important. And it really aligns with the reality that Laura alluded to. This sort of PCDD work has been very fragmented until now. We're just not, we're slowly coming out of the starting gate, I like to say. The biggest barrier is definitely culture change. And this is a huge shift in the culture of drug development. And we're also lagging behind in things like policy to support this shift. Technical infrastructure, best practices, none of that is in place yet. So we have a ways to go.
You want to add anything on this slide, or do you think we've covered it now?
I think we did. I think we're ahead of the game already.
All right. So Marian, we'd love to hear an example from you then about your personal experience and then how that is translating into an example of patient involvement in this kind of activism.
Absolutely. So and I'm quick with the clicker today, apparently. Wow. No, I'm good. I'm good. Ahead of myself a little bit. So as Leanne mentioned, I became an outspoken advocate for Alzheimer's families when I ended up with multiple parents and in-laws with dementia. As you've all probably guessed, it's a life journey I never expected to take. So how many of you have a family member, neighbor, colleague, friend who is experiencing Alzheimer's? Oh, okay, yeah, I'm not surprised. A few stats here. For those who aren't as familiar with this disease, it's the 6th leading cause of death in our country. There is no treatment, there is no cure. It impacts over 5 million individuals, with 3 times that many people actually caring for them. It is the costliest disease in America. RAND came out with a great report that told us that. It actually eclipses cancer and heart disease. It will cost $20 trillion, that's trillion with a T, dollars in total cost of care by 2050. $20 trillion. This is not, by the way, an old person's disease anymore. I actually became a caregiver at roughly around the age of 30, definitely changing the landscape of this disease. So I'm actually here today. I'm thrilled to be able to spend some time introducing you to the National Alzheimer's Patient and Caregiver-Powered Research Network. We have an acronym. It is ADPCPRN, really ugly acronym, I might add. But I use a shorthand now and again because this is a lot of words, obviously. So it's the Alzheimer's PPRN is what I will, it will flash by in that modality from now on. This is actually one of 20 patient-powered research networks funded by PCORI and part of their Patient-Centered Clinical Research Network. So there are 4 partners involved in this effort. You see them here. We've got, it's actually led by the Us Against Alzheimer's Networks and the Mayo Clinic, and we have our friends at the University of Florida, and then the UCSF Brain Health Registry are close partners in this. Talk more about them in a little bit. Okay, so we have many ambitious goals. These include amplifying patient and family caregiver voices in dementia research, removing the stigma from clinical trial participation. Of course, finding the right patient for the right trial, especially women and minorities. I'll be emphasizing that as we talk about this today, and validating the importance of the family caregiver voice in clinical research, something that we have not done before in this country, especially for Alzheimer's. So this is a nice visual of what we're focused on. Again, note the emphasis on family caregivers. You can tell I'm excited about that, right? So we're also assembling a group of advocates, little a advocates, to participate in critical early adopter activities. So we're talking about focus groups, mobile health app testing, and online registry use. We have a nifty name. We're called the A-List. That is the brainchild of she's the brilliant and dedicated, we'll call her in football terms quarterback of all of this, and it is Meryl Comer, who came up with the A-List idea. And speaking of the A-List, we have exciting news to share, big results in this neighborhood. We actually set a goal of 1,000 A-listers. So we wanted to find 1,000 advocates, potentially mostly family caregivers who had cared for someone with this disease, to share their experiences and their expertise in kind of these early adopter activities. Well, we eclipsed that goal. We now have 1,350 A-list members. We're all excited about that. In addition, over 32,000 older adults are now participating in the Brain Health Registry. Again, that's UCSF's, that's our partner who maintains that registry, along with over 3,000 study partners, of which 1,300 plus are actually dementia caregivers. Progress, slow but sure. We've enrolled over 1,700 people into clinical studies. Obviously, we have a long way to go when it comes to recruitment of minorities and overall clinical trial recruitment. It is an uphill battle for sure. So we are listening and learning. More than 2,000 people answered our survey when we asked them this question: if a medication could improve memory and help preserve independence, what would be most important to you? So, as you can see, the answers differed among those who were diagnosed with dementia as opposed to their care partners, aka family caregivers. These are the types of questions that have not been asked until now. We are definitely gaining insight here at every step. All right, more big news. And this is where I'm doing a shout out for my friends at Antidote who are here at the conference. We've actually launched two new tools thanks to our friends at Rubric and Antidote. These are designed to help people learn about clinical trials, kind of take the mystery of out of what a clinical trial is. You'd be surprised at the poor health literacy in this country and how intimidating this is to people. This is designed to take the mystery out of it. And then our friends at Antidote are helping to match people to the appropriate clinical trial. So please go to galaxybraintrust.org right there at the top of this screen and check out these tools. You may find that your organization may not be focused on Alzheimer's. That's okay. These tools can be customized for your particular disease focus. All right. So those of you who know me know that I like to assign homework. So there are 5 things up on the screen, and I'm actually going to give you a bonus item that you can do right now to support the Alzheimer's PPRN. First of all, go to the Brain Health Registry and sign up. And more on that in just a second. Okay, I have specific instructions. Join the Us Against Alzheimer's movement. Learn more about the importance of women in clinical trials on FDA's website. And by the way, I've got some handouts on that and a few other things that I have here on my action item list for you. Follow PCORI and PCORNet on Twitter. Remember I told you that our patient-powered research network, it's funded by PCORI, but it falls under PCORNet, which is they're a whole group of patient-powered research networks and clinical research data research networks that are funded by PCORI. So both PCORI and PCORNet have separate handles on Twitter. Definitely follow them. I got handouts on that too. Share this info with your colleagues and friends. Those of you who have heard me speak before know that I often talk about Alzheimer's being an epidemic in this country and one that we cannot afford to ignore anymore. And I think that $20 trillion number probably emphasized that better than I can. All right, the Brain Health Registry. I told you we would get back to this, and here we are. So I need everyone in this room to participate in the Brain Health Registry. Go to brainhealthregistry.org, okay, that we can do, brainhealthregistry.org. Set up a profile, fill out the questionnaires, play the brain games. It's actually fun. I do this, it's fun. You actually will help move brain research forward. We need all hands on deck to address this epidemic, and not only to move research forward, but to get closer to a learning health system. So I'll turn it back over to Leanne and Laura.
Thanks, Marianne. I have to say, I went to the brainhealthregistry.org last May when Marianne told me to do that. And I will just reinforce, it is important. It will take all of us because it's a big problem and it'll take big data to fix it. And so by having all of us participate, this is an easy way for you to participate in clinical research. There's no informed consent or blood draws or urinalysis or et cetera, et cetera. You can just go to this website and fill out some forms and actually.
Don't need your urine. No, we do not. Thank you. No, thanks. Nice thought, but.
Okay, so let's move back to another definition. So we've talked about patient-centered drug development a little bit and shown an example of that. Let's talk more now about the learning health system. You want to tell us what that is to start?
So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about why I'm interested in this learning health system. So Leanne told you that I care and I work in this space of improving information at the point of care. And I do that because I worked in hospitals before I came to Lilly, and I was shaped there by the frustration and the desperate feeling that the clinicians had that I worked with who couldn't get the complete patient data. They couldn't get the evidence that they needed for their patients. They also had information overload while they had information poverty. I had patients in my office who were grateful for just some lame pamphlet that I could give them about their treatment. So that shaped me, and I wanted to improve that, and I was struck by how the healthcare delivery system and research seemed to be like completely separate universes. It felt like we didn't talk at all. So I went to the research side, and I've worked in that space ever since. So when I learned about the learning health system, it has become something that I feel is almost a grand unification theory for this. And it matters to patient-centered drug development because it will help, as Marianne said, it'll give us some of the technical and policy changes that we need and culture changes to make patient-centered drug development more systematic. So what is the learning health system? It's an idea that originally came from the National Academy of Medicine. They did years of research on this, convened all these great minds to talk about what it would take to actually build a learning health system. And the vision of that is that research and practice are connected in a rapid learning loop. And now we add to that the real world experiences and values of people, so that what happens at the point of care is informing research, and what happens in research, new innovations are more impactful at the point of care. It still takes an average of 17 years for a medical innovation to be used pervasively in practice. Nobody wins with that. And then both research and practice need to be informed by the real world experiences of people. So building this thing would be, this is a clumsy analogy, but it would be like how we created the internet and the World Wide Web. We're not talking about creating one new database, or we're talking about connecting existing nodes so that data, information, and evidence can flow, and so that we can all be connected and act as a real system. And in that system, we could, when we have that connection, we can see what's happening and we can learn more quickly. So we would have this rapid learning from every patient. Would you go to the next slide? Thank you, Marianne. So the National Academy of Medicine did this amazing research for years. They published something like 15 different workshop proceedings. And in 2012, a group came together that calls itself the Learning Health Community. And the Learning Health Community is, we're at 114 organizations and companies who are going to build this thing. So we've taken it from the arc of a beautiful vision and idea to this deep research, and now the Learning Health Community is doing the planning and the building. One of the first things that the Learning Health Community did to get this kicked off was to come up with these core values. So you see, these are the core values of the Learning Health System, and I feel really wonderful that the first one is person-centered. And we are very careful about that, to not say patient-centered, because I want the learning to be from me as a whole person, not just those moments when I'm interacting with the healthcare delivery system or with research. Let's go to the next. So as I said, the characteristics of this learning health system would be that we would be able to learn from every consenting person to inform other patients, other people, and to inform research. This rapid learning would fuel continuous improvement, and all of this would be part of our culture. So our focus would be on this rapid learning and the sharing of learnings, which is completely the opposite of what we have today, which we call our non-learning, non-health, non-system. We have this fragmented mess right now, and this is trying to pull that together for the good of all stakeholders. So the reason that we're talking about the learning health system in this session on patient-centered drug development is because I believe the learning health system is forming the connected health ecosystem. And I don't think that we can have systematic patient drug development if we don't have a connected health ecosystem. We just can't keep going the way that we're going. So patient-centered drug development needs a connected health ecosystem, and the learning health system is that connected health ecosystem. I think I've covered these points. We can go to the next. I'm craning because see that light's right in my eyes.
Well, scoot forward a little bit, maybe. Is that better?
Pull that. Thank you, Marianne. Nimble ways that we could share our data. I would love to own my data, and I would love to be able to say, this person can see it now, okay, take away that access. This person can see it now, take away that access. And I could control the flow of that. So the learning health system will help establish some of those policies.
There I am. Something that we were talking about, and that is seeing clinical trials as a care option. You know, now, in relating that to the Alzheimer's PPRN, clinical trials are now kind of the avenue of last resort. And why can't those, especially for Alzheimer's families, when we know right now that there are no reliable treatments, there's no cure, these conversations should naturally be coming from our providers. It should be a two-way street where providers are helping us learn, and then helping us in that decision-making process to potentially enter a clinical trial. It's such an important piece of work that could come from this.
I agree, Marianne, and it's just baffling to me that this is an epidemic, and yet we can't enroll enough people in our trials to move the science forward, to come up with some cures or some help. So that's just another way that the healthcare delivery system and research are so separate that, never once has a clinician said to me, think about this clinical trial, even when that would have been an appropriate thing to say for me or the people that I care for.
Same here. Literally 3 out of 4 parents with dementia, 3 different types, and never in all the years I've been dealing with this has anyone ever said to me, you guys should consider a clinical trial. Never. And I've been dealing with this over 30 years. So that has got to change.
And what is the number? Something like 2% of people in the United States participate in trials? Is that 2 to 3%? And I believe the polls, too, say that people would be willing to do that. It's the disconnect of it not being brought to them in the moment.
Exactly. And the stigma around it, you know. People are afraid, you know, patients and family caregivers are afraid to bring up this topic because it's almost an admission of giving up, you know. And we have to change that framework. We have to make this an acceptable modality of care in this country, part of it.
And celebrate people as heroes. I know that's what you work on.
Yes.
Well, a couple of things that are coming to mind here for me. I think the learning loop is a big takeaway that makes this all make sense. And we have data from a nonprofit organization that studies clinical research that says something in the range of 90% of people prefer to hear about clinical research from their doctor, but less than 50% do. And so that's where these online resources that you offered up today, Marianne, become really important and essential. But the downside of that is then we're, again, pushing the responsibility to the patient, where they've already got so much burden on them, which we talk about a lot at conferences like MedX. So yeah, I think the whole system, you know, can improve in that way, and if we get that learning loop going better. The other thing that you talked about that I think is really exciting is this idea of the patient owning their data and being the one in control of that information, whereas now it's very paternalistic, sort of top-down kind of system where the data that is the patient's sits somewhere else, and we have to pay to get access to it. At least my parents have been through that situation just recently, where if my mom wanted to get access to her medical records and they said, sure, pay $25 for us to make a photocopy of all these paper files for you to then go and take to another doctor. So there are some real barriers to that in the current system.
And I'm having the same fight. You know, I'm trying to get my basic medical records from my wonderful provider, but such a simple thing. And it's, what do I have to show up with a lawyer and a news crew to, you know, I'll pay $25. I can do that. And HIPAA says you're not supposed to do that. You know, right. It doesn't cost $25.
The answer to that question is yes, by the way. You do have to show up with lawyers and a news crew, so just so you know.
Okay.
All right, so we've got a couple of tips for the guys, the folks in the audience today. So if we'll go to the next slide on what you can do to get involved in these initiatives. So you want to talk through that, Laura?
Sure. So if you are interested in this learning health system concept, I'm glad to talk about that. There's some resources here where you can learn more. One thing that would be really, really helpful to take this from vision to a real operational learning health system, which the plan is that we will have this operational learning health system by 2024. So the helpful thing that you could do is fly this up the flagpole at your organization and have them become, your company, your organization become part of the learning health community. So the more that we have these stakeholder groups from all across health, and the more that we are working together on this, that's what it's going to take. As you said, it's a big, big, big thing to try to do. So glad to talk more with you about that if you want to become part of that learning health community. And if you do that, then you can engage in a lot of our activities and raise awareness of the learning health system. And there's a new journal, actually, this Learning Health Systems journal that launched, I think, about a year ago. You can stay up to date with what's going on there. But my email is on the next slide, and I'm always glad to talk about that.
Also, I failed to say at the outset that I am the community manager, so the social media manager behind the Twitter handle @LilyTrials. And there should be a tweet coming out soon because I pre-planned it, if it's not out already, that has a link to that journal that you were talking about. So if you want to go on Twitter and check out @LilyTrials or #MedX, you should have access to it there as well. So these are other ways you can keep up with some of the work that we're doing at Lilly. or reach out to any of the three of us. And I think we do have, I don't know, 3 or 4 minutes for questions, if there are any questions from the audience. Yeah, great question. So I don't know if everybody heard it, but there was a general question about people's experience in clinical trials and the fear of getting assigned to placebo or seeing that as a downside. Yeah, we didn't list them here, but we do a lot of work with a group called CISCRP, CISCRP. There's CISCRP.org. It's a nonprofit organization associated with Tufts University, and they do surveys, I think every other year. Is that right, Kelly? Okay, every other year they do a survey of people who have been in clinical trials and the public to specifically measure perceptions about clinical research. Excuse me. And a couple of things have come to light over the past, I think they've done it 3 or 4 times now. One is that 95% of people who have participated in a clinical trial would do it again. So that's a pretty high customer satisfaction rate. Another piece of data we have, though, is that fear of getting placebo is a real detractor. And something I've read about more recently, I don't know if, Laura, you're aware of this, but people who design clinical trials are realizing our old way of doing it just is not going to be sustainable. It's too expensive, it takes too long, it's hard to get people enrolled, all those kinds of things. So this is another big problem we're trying to fix, actually. But one of the things I read about most recently is that they're looking at ways to not have to do a control arm that has placebo. They can assign people in the trial to the active treatment arm and then use historical data as the comparator arm. And they're looking at ways to consider those kinds of designs. Now, I don't know how many trials are out there that are actually doing that, but that's an idea that's being considered, to kind of speak to your point.
And I'm not an expert on that, but I know that we're looking at what we call pragmatic or adaptive clinical trial models that work pretty much as Leanne said, but which have constant learning and the ability to adjust in the trial instead of, the model has been, here's how this trial will be and nothing will change. Otherwise, our data is seen as invalid. So we are married to that. But now we're finding some ways to use real-world data and real-world analytics so that we can not manipulate, but so that we can respond in a trial. So we still have to lay that out. So we say, here's what we're going to do, and if this happens here and this happens there, we're going to change the date on this one. So we can't not lay that out and hide or anything. But we now have some more data and more analytics to be able to learn while we're going. So that's still pretty new, and we're worried, as you can imagine, that will we get regulatory approval from those kinds of trials. So the industry is trying to do that. That's another thing where everybody wins if we can do those kinds of trials.
I would add, too, that one thing a project we're undertaking with the Alzheimer's PPRN is documenting Alzheimer's patients and their experiences in clinical trials, and we're doing that on video. So we're literally from the beginning of this this effort of kind of standing up the Patient-Powered Research Network. We decided that part of what we needed to do was to document just that. Patients, step by step in clinical trials, they're documenting their experiences on video. So we're really excited about that part too.
From my time in hospitals, I just think it's amazing that so many good decisions get made in healthcare. When you see what clinicians go through, it's shocking. And now we're asking them to do more and more and more and more endlessly, where they have such limited time that we've had this triple aim for years, and now it's the quadruple aim to address clinician burnout. So yes, I read about wonderful experiments and projects that people are doing to try to help clinicians have these conversations, and it's not. I'm not an expert in that, but I think it's not that we don't know how to do that. It's where is that time going to come from for the clinician? So we have amazing models of shared decision making, and we know what works in that. But they don't get paid for that. and where is the time going to come from?
And this is really a serious topic in the Alzheimer's community. You probably saw a study that came out probably a year and a half ago. The percentage of people with dementia who never get a diagnosis recorded in their medical record is enormous. It's like over 50%. So, you know, of course, what is it for Medicare patients in their clinical visits is 7 minutes, I think, was the last figure I saw. You can't have those conversations in 7 minutes. So it's really bad in our community.
I'm afraid I might misremember the metrics now that I know you're going to tweet it out, but I'll tell you what I said. It's more than 80% of patients prefer to hear about clinical research from their physician, but fewer than 50% do. I think that's roughly right. Certainly.